if we look at private equity, venture capital funds, alternative assets across the world, on an aggregate, women make up about 19 to 20% of the workforce. As you move up and you think about the senior levels, the percentage comes down to a range of 8 to 10%. And within that, if you start to dissect, what you find is that a majority of these senior level roles for women are held in their capacities as CFOs, heads of HR, and heads of investor relations, and very rarely as investment partners and as members of investment committees at investment funds.
So just in the best interest of time, I think our attendees we've just begun broadcasting and our guests are also joining in slowly. So welcome everyone to the Blue Circle. It's such a big privilege and a pleasure to reconnect with everyone, our distinguished panelists who are handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience that they bring in. And thank you to our distinguished audience for joining us. We've received 100 registrations, most of whom are CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are members and are repeat visitors to our webinars, which is very encouraging and motivates us to provide higher levels of dialogue through the online channels as well. And for those of you who are new with us today, Blue Circle is the world's first sector-specific networking app for senior leaders that's built in India. And we currently focus on 20 sector communities such as e-mobility, energy, real estate, healthcare, logistics, and many more. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. And along with our weekly webinar series and our digital publication, you'll be happy to know that we very recently launched the first version of the Blue Circle app. It's somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for senior leaders, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with 5,000 plus like-minded leaders from India and from across the globe, house high-quality curated content, and also access business opportunities across our core sectors. So those leaders who are interested, please do join us. I will also share the link to the app in the chat section and also send out invitations to our new guests post the webinar. And today, as part of our investment series, we're privileged to have big minds and leading thinkers of the industry to join in for our community's discussion. The topic is driving gender balance among enterprise founders and investors. And now, in the best interest of time, I will just briefly mention the names and designations of the panelists we have with us today. We have with us Mr. Mukund Krishnaswami, partner, Lighthouse Funds, Ms. Nupur Garg, founder, WinPE, and our chair and moderator for the session is Mr. Pavan Choudary, author, CEO, public intellectual, and chairman, Blue Circle. So welcome everybody, and also a special thanks to WinPE who have joined us as our knowledge partners. And I now request Mr. Choudary to please chair and moderate the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Siddharth. Even in advanced countries, the percentage of women in the entrepreneurship space and business space is only 20%. In India, only 7% of the entrepreneurs are women. And in the venture capital and funding space, less than 20% of the women are women, of the individuals are women. What is the reason for this gender imbalance? Is it that men and women are made differently? Men are suited for some tasks differently than women are. Works like men are from Mars and women are from Venus perhaps may wish to suggest that. Though I would not blindly dismiss all of that hypothesis. There may be some constitutional differences, but for me, the differences are not that profound. If somebody says men are from Mars and women are from Venus, I would say, well, I would say the difference is more like between Mars and Snickers. not like between Mars and Venus. And also, I feel that constitutional differences cannot alone justify the gender disparity which we see in entrepreneurship and in funding. Globally, there are 102 men to 100 women, so nearly equal. This kind of gender disparity is not justified by constitutional differences, if there are any, by them. Also, I feel that constitutional differences are acquired over time and they can be erased with time. And we will speak more of this. Are the reasons for just gender disparity then social, in terms of social norms, mobility, social networks available? Or are they financial, in terms of access to finance and capital? Or there are some other reasons? This is what we are going to deep dive into with our two panelists, who are really in a unique position to comment on this. On that note, let me ask Nupur to come in and tell us, where does the reality stand of gender diversity? What have been the reasons for the status that we are in? And then we will go to the remedies. First, where is the reality and what are the reasons in her view? Nupur.
Thank you, Pavan, and a pleasure to be here. We are focused on the investment sector today, so I'll start with some data related to the investment sector. If we look at private equity, venture capital funds, alternative assets across the world, on an aggregate, women make up about 19 to 20% of the workforce. As you move up and you think about the senior levels, the percentage comes down to a range of 8 to 10%. And within that, if you start to dissect, what you find is that a majority of these senior level roles for women are held in their capacities as CFOs, heads of HR, and heads of investor relations, and very rarely as investment partners and as members of investment committees at investment funds. If we follow the chain forward and we think about the funding that goes to women-led businesses, that percentage ranges between 4 to 7%, depending on the market you are in. And if you dig further into reports and research, there is now an established correlation between the presence or absence of women on an investor's team to the presence or absence of women in their investment portfolio. So the probability that an investment team will actually back a woman-led company is really linked to how many women, or whether there are any women in the deal team that is evaluating that particular company. And one data point that I absolutely love and I want to share here is even when women-led companies get funding, their probability of raising a subsequent round is significantly lower than that for a male-led company. And for those women-led businesses that actually raise a subsequent round, in almost 1/3 of the instances, the woman CEO or woman founder is replaced by a male for raising the subsequent round. And that happens only 2% of the times in case of a male-led company. So when you think about the chain of events, it starts from women being in the investment team, to women getting into the portfolio, to being able to sustain themselves in their positions as promoters and founders and leaders within the portfolio. And, while we are talking of data, I think we should also sort of acknowledge that now we have data that establishes how gender diversity is accretive to business. We have had a lot of McKinsey data that has spoken about how gender diversity results in enhanced financial performance. We now have similar data for private equity and venture capital funds. And this data says that gender balanced teams can deliver up to 15% greater IRR than the median and up to 25% higher than median MOICs. So the financial case, the business case is very, very clear. But the data has not yet started reflecting that the case is very clear. I'll stop there.
So if the financial case is so clear and the picture is, let me say, so murky, what is the reason for that? What are the reasons why you feel the situation is as it is?
So I think there are a number of reasons. It is a very complex and a very nuanced challenge that we have. But in my own view, and just based on the experience that I have gathered, working through WinPE, it does start with socioeconomic factors. And at the root of everything comes down to unconscious biases. Because you see, people are educated, people are very progressive. Investors, when we look around the industry, they're very smart people. And there is no reason why anybody would consciously try to discriminate. But it does come down to the gender stereotypes that we all grew up with, the gender stereotypes that then get embedded within our psyches and start forming themselves into unconscious biases. And that is at the root of most of the issues. So when it comes to, say, investors, the way you hire people, there is an unconscious process bias in how you screen. The way you source your deals, you reach out to your networks, and how you form your networks. There is an unconscious bias in how you connect to people and who are the kind of people that you bring in your networks. There are stereotypes in those networks. And then similarly, if you look at the other side for women, the gender stereotypes that they are brought up with and the unconscious biases that they are brought up with have resulted in women having relatively limited networks. For example, a very, very cliched thing in the society is women should not go out in the evening. Hanging out in clubs over a drink in the evening is not a good thing. When you're unmarried, it's not something that good girls do. When you're married, it's not something that good married girls do. It's a very, very cliched example. But I think it does bring to fore what I'm talking about when it comes to gender stereotypes and the biases that both the genders grew up with. And that starts to affect how you form your networks, who are the kind of people that you tend to reach out to. Do you have a larger access? Do you have a broader set of people that you can reach out for advice? Or how do you look and how do you evaluate deals and how do you evaluate candidates when you're hiring?
Great points. And we will come back to this gender stereotyping point which you made. Very good points, Nupur. Coming to Mukund. Mukund, what would you like to add to what Nupur has said about the reality of women's participation in the entrepreneurial and funding space and the reasons why it is so low? Mukund.
Sure, and Pavan, and thanks for having us. Listen, I think Nupur has hit the nail on the head, and I think a lot of it is there's a lot of history, right? We're taking a snapshot in time and saying, hey, the numbers are low, and that is a result of many decades of things that have come before. Right, and think about a typical, family, my own, right? I think my grandmother was educated until 4th or 5th standard, right? My grandfather, went all the way through to college, right? And that's not an uncommon thing, right? And so it's in terms of the number of women that have had opportunities in the last 50 years, right? And then, therefore, you say, therefore, there have been fewer people that have gone into sort of traditional business roles and are in leadership positions over the last few decades. And then, so in the last decade or two, as you've had a much higher participation in higher level education going into professional ranks, you don't have the mentorship, you don't have the senior level participation from women. And therefore, the younger women don't necessarily have the female role models to look up to who can also guide them, right? And I'm not saying, and I'll make a very crude statement. I mean, my own firm, you know, it was started by 3 men, and Nupur knows this all very well. She's been friends with us for a long time. And we now have 2 women partners in the firm. And it's, you know, but my wife told me something when both of my women partners, when they were a little bit earlier in their career, and it'll sound crude in public forum, but she said, "You're 3 guys running a firm and none of you have ever had a period." And she said, keep that in mind. That day-to-day experience for a man, no matter how open-minded you may be, you don't understand as a male, as much as you want to, the day-to-day struggles. And so I say that, I hope there's a little shock effect because maybe some of your audience members have never talked about it in a public forum. But unless we start destigmatizing that stuff and actually talk about it, you'll never get there. But I think the fact that these types of discussions like we're having today are happening, every day gets better. It won't be as fast as we want, but I think every day gets better. And I think that's sort of the process of moving it forward. And I think some of the successes you're seeing amongst women entrepreneurs, you know, this week, Nykaa is going public. It's Falguni Nair, who we backed 3 years ago. I mean, when you start seeing success and the results that Nupur was talking about, and by the way, the results at Nykaa are going to be far greater of a delta beyond male-led businesses in India than anything most people have seen. I think all of that helps, and it's a virtuous cycle, and I think we're heading in the right direction.
Excellent. I think you've said beautifully. The march of time for women has been very slow. You spoke about your grandmother and your grandfather, where your grandmother could study only till 4th or 5th class, whereas your grandfather went right up to post-graduation. And that was, I think, maximum 100 years back. If we go a little further back in time, we will see that even in the golden age of Greeks, where women had the best or were about to have the best possible status, women were not allowed outside the homes. Even for socialization, men were going to parties with other men. Homosexuality in that golden age was banned, but was easily allowed. It was not punished, only legally. So woman was sitting at home, not educated, and not given the freedom to make her personality evolve through sociability, social graces, etc. And this needle has not moved fast enough for women. You're absolutely right. And if we were to go back further, only 5,000 or 10,000 years of our existence, have we been in any of those time frames where women have been given some kind of status or some kind of equality? Before that, it was a complete jungle law. So 75% of our brains are still biased, which is what Nupur perhaps spoke of when she was speaking about stereotypes. A stereotype is a widely held, perhaps unjust or super just justification, because there are some positive stereotypes also. And the second point which you said is, as long as we will continue to label certain things as taboo, we will not be able to kind of come to a resolution which handles those taboos. You spoke about the menstrual cycle, and that is, it is a disadvantage which the woman has, and she has to overcome that and physiologically and still perform as well as a man does. So great points, and truth very well told, Mukund. Coming back to Nupur, the stereotypes which you spoke of, there are some negative stereotypes about women. For example, women can be seen as too soft, or let me say, because of the fact that they are associated with child caring, looking after elders, etc. They might be seen as people who are not fully committed to, let us say, a career. These are the negative stereotypes. There can be some positive stereotypes also. For example, women can be considered as more nurturing. What taboo Mukund spoke of, that also makes women more understanding of mom economy, the pregnant women's economy, which is a very big economy, or the child rearing economy, which is also a very big economy. So do you not feel that these stereotypes may cancel out the negative stereotypes to some extent? Or you feel even if they cancel out, still the burden of the negative stereotypes is too much against the woman? Nupur.
So I believe every stereotype is bad. There is no positive stereotype. Because by creating any kind of stereotype, you are labeling everybody and painting everybody in the same brush. So, let's go back to one positive stereotype you brought about nurturing. By default, you would assume every woman should be nurturing and therefore expect her to conduct herself or behave in the office in a certain manner. So if she turns out to be a hard taskmaster at work, who expects her team to be, top notch in their delivery, absolutely professional in their conduct, and will not stand for, poor quality work or dillying and dallying and sort of gossiping or whatever. And yes, Mukund, I see you smiling, right? So then it gives birth to another stereotype, which says that, oh, this woman is so aggressive. She's so abrasive.
Yeah.
So I think there is no good stereotype. A stereotype is a stereotype. Let me give you another example of this. This is a relatively recent conversation I had with a fund manager, where we were talking about the challenge in hiring women. And this fund manager shared with me that they had been hiring women like 100% of the time in all of their recent roles. And I said, wow, fantastic. Please share with me, what did you manage to change? So they said, we want to hire people who work closely with founders. So we started hiring for EQ. And that was great, while they said we started hiring for EQ. But then they added, we stopped hiring for technical skills. And that, I think, is the problem. The assumption that you have to have a trade-off, that you cannot find a man who has high EQ and high technical skills, or you cannot find a woman with a high EQ and high technical skills. And I think that is the basic problem with stereotypes.
Yeah. So my point was more about the impact of stereotype on the fortune of a sex. My point was that a particular stereotype may have a positive impact, a particular stereotype may have a negative impact. But I hear you, and it's a beautiful point. And thank you very much for making it, Nupur. So if I was to bring this to Mukund, the women in a male-dominated setting, McKinsey report is recently saying that 15% of the woman has a lower chance by 15% of getting promoted. And imagine that this is coming through as a research which is proving somewhere that woman is really disadvantaged. Or Ethan Mollick's research from Wharton School. Ethan Mollick has said that the hubris quotient of the man is distinctly more than a woman on a median level. And that hubris and overconfidence makes him a better candidate for entrepreneurship and for funding. How would you handle this kind of data if it starts emerging from the research labs of the world? If the research labs of the world start saying that 100% both the sexes are not the same, there are certain things in which women as a medium are better, and there are certain things in which the man as a medium is better. If that starts coming out, how would you react to this kind of research if it starts staring you in the face that they are different? Mukund.
Well, I'm an alum of both of those institutions, McKinsey and Wharton, and what both of those places taught me is to look behind the research, right? The research is it's backward driven, and it's necessarily based on outcomes, right? What I would like to understand is what were the inputs that led to those outcomes, right? So yes, you know, women's performance is 15% lower based on some research. Okay, I'm in no way questioning the capability of the authenticity of the research or the capability of the researchers, right? But what is the reason for that? Is it historic education opportunity? Is it a lack of support in the professional environment? Is it you know, social and other biases and pressures that Nupur talked about earlier? Is it organizations that failed to recognize these things and therefore did not lend the sort of support for those things? And you know, you put all that together and you say, okay, then you look forward and say, based on that, what are the things I can do as I build my organization that addresses those unconscious biases or conscious biases, right? And that's how I would use the research, right? Because I think looking backwards can be helpful, but only to the extent that we look beyond it and understand the why. Beyond that, okay, it's telling me, I mean, I can look at a list of the top, you know, look at the top 100 companies in India or top 100 companies in the US and say, you know, how many have women CEOs, CFOs, chief marketing officers? I mean, you can do the math, right? But the real question is the why, and then figuring out what we as organizations can do. And it's not going to change overnight. And Nupur and I have this conversation all the time. It's not going to change overnight, but it's a generational thing. And if what would change over 30 years based on work of organizations like WinPE, we can help make it happen in 10 years or 15 years, that's a massive change for an entire generation of women leaders. And I agree also, Nupur, with the statistics of you're going to see that as you have more diversity of any sort at the leadership level, when you have more women, you are going to continue to see greater and greater sort of economic value created, and that's going to result in shareholder returns and so on and so forth.
I fully accept your point. And I think the historical perspective which you're giving, I was just thinking about 1920s and before, when women did not have the right to vote. And the arguments why they should not be given the right to vote extended from that women are not prepared for the toxic vapors of public life, to that marriages will disintegrate if man votes one side and woman votes another side, to nations will become weaker. But today, 20% of the women in public life, of the people in public life are women, and 20 countries are headed by women. So time has proved the fact that those constitutional differences are not insurmountable, even if they are there. And on that note is what I wanted to say about the McKinsey report, and I think I misspoke earlier. The McKinsey report says that the chances of a woman to get a promotion in the corporate sector are 15% less than that of a man to get that promotion, everything else being equal. So this is the point which I wanted to bring out, and I will take this to Nupur. So Nupur, just in case Ethan Mollick is saying that this hubris is, or misplaced confidence. It is nothing to be very proud of. It is misplaced confidence. Confidence, despite the fact that there is no reason to be confident, is something, this braggadocio comes naturally to man. And on the other hand, he's also saying that women's presence may bring a little more level-headedness to the team. So her weakness in this regard may be misunderstood. But if more research starts coming to this on these lines, how do you think is it going to play out? Or how can we still make a very strong case, as strong as that for man, despite the research coming, and how should it be nuanced on its way forward? Nupur.
Pavan, the research is originating out of Wharton, so I have utmost request for respect for Wharton. So we'll keep the research and its views aside, with all due respect. And but see, I think the challenge here is that we are again sort of attempting to say women are like this and men are like this, and we are sort of forgetting that everybody is an individual. And such broad generalizations, I think, are also either originating from gender stereotypes and unconscious biases, or feeding into stereotypes and biases. I mean, we've read so much of this report that we now believe that men have more confidence and women have less confidence, right? So I think
see, let us be fair to Ethan Mollick also. I think he's from your alma mater or from Mukund's. He's not Mukund's. He's saying not that men are more confident. He's saying that men are more filibustering. They think more of themselves than they are capable of, and they come to the table thumping, I will do it, it is done. Women are more realistic. They are saner in their commitments. But this kind of filibustering makes the investor put the money on him. This is the point he's making.
Well, then I'm very worried about backing such an investor. I mean, I would rather have an investor who's able to look at what the entrepreneur is capable of and what the underlying proposal is about, rather than, get carried away with posturing and things like that. And I think Mukund wanted to say something there. But see, and that's one of the things that we are working very hard at WinPE on. So when we work with all the firms that are our members and who are absolutely committed to building gender balance, and we talk about gender balance and diversity here, it's never sort of about saying we should have quotas, we should hire women, or X percentage of our hires should be women, because then you're sort of we'll raise that later, but then we're actually getting into a zone of saying you need to either subsidize the hiring process, or you need to sort of demonstrate that women are better than men, and therefore they should be hired, and not a male candidate. But what we are really focusing on is making sure that the process is objective. And once that process is objective, whether it is at an interview where you have a male candidate banging the table and saying, I am the best fit for this job, and maybe a stereotype woman candidate trying to explain how her experience fits into this position, or when we are talking about an investor evaluating a business deal, and listening to an entrepreneur who's sort of bragging about how good they are, or an entrepreneur who's really sort of focused on how that business is going to grow, what's the size of the market opportunity, what's the strategy, what's the team, etc. So I have used stereotypes myself in this, but I think this is where we need to focus: the objectiveness and the unbiased process.
You have hit the nail on the head. You are basically saying, like musicians used to be hired in the past, by listening to them from behind the screen so that you could not make out whether it is a man playing or a woman playing, So reduce the bias in the process of selection. And similarly, the chest thumping should not be allowed to become an emotional reason for you to back XYZ. Rather than that, get into the data. How many customers acquired, how much money spent, and so on. So all the metrics is what should prevail. Great points, Nupur. And I think this is one of the remedies to the status that we are in. Mukund, you were saying something.
No, Nupur covered it, so I'll leave it.
Okay, great. So this is regarding the social stereotypes, etc., and how we can look beyond them and pierce through them. Coming to the financial side now. In many countries of the world, it is said that the woman does not have as much access to family funds for an entrepreneurial project. In some countries of the world, the law also disadvantages her because she doesn't have equal property rights. Have you also found these and some other obstacles to women to become an investor or an entrepreneur? Mukund?
Listen, I can speak about it anecdotally, but if you look through it, it's certainly the case, right? The way historically families have divided capital, the way they've divided assets, it is often followed to the male children as opposed to the female children. That's certainly the case in India. I think different states are different. So there's certainly those issues. I think if you go to the more formal financial institution environment, and I'm sure there has been research done here, certainly that's the case where over the last 50 years, and I know there's been work done in the US where the amount of financial capital available from banks has been far less available to women than men right now, whether that is their policy level biases or at a lending officer bias or a sort of credit committee bias, I don't know, but it doesn't matter, right? We'd have to figure that out. And so certainly there are policy level and institutional level changes that need to be made. But I think part of the reason, for example, the work that say Nupur is doing at WinPE is so significant is if you take even a modicum of sort of belief in, hey, money makes the world go round. At the end of the day, powering the next generation of entrepreneurs also requires that in the venture capital, private equity, startup funding community, that there be greater levels of women participation. Not that men can't back women or that women can't back men, and we've seen both happen. But I think what having senior level women that Nupur was at 8 to 10% at the sort of senior levels, and 4 to 7% at the senior levels of these funds. Well, suddenly, I think it's important because I think women sometimes will be able to better recognize the men are, to use your stereotype, the men are just, sort of chest thumping and, all hat and no cattle, or, it's, so I think increasing participation in decision-making only increases the ability to look through and make the right decisions around who's capable and who's not. And then you're going to find more women receiving that funding. So I think that's sort of the natural flow of things. And if we can accelerate that, I think we're all better for it.
Great point. And I like your metaphor, all hat and no cap. I've added this to my vocabulary when I speak about this kind of chest thumping, getting investor support. Nupur, the point which Mukund brought in and endorsing what you said, that limited partner space, let us say, to kind of home in further, limited partner space has very few women. Though banking, I was thinking, is well permeated with women. That means surely in the banking space, even at CXO level, they are bringing solid value. Is the travel in that sector not likely to improve the gender balance eventually in this adjacent sector of PE and venture capital funding, Nupur?
So see, I don't have the data on hand for, say, something like a banking sector. But if I think about it, yes, the banking sector does have a lot more women than, say, the investment industry does. But again, you have to sort of go back and say, what are the roles that these women generally tend to have? And, even within limited partners, the institutional limited partners, you'll probably see greater gender diversity because most of these pensions and DFIs and endowments, they've had this emphasis on institutionalizing processes and taking away, any kind of biases because the processes are so hard coded in the system. But I think so at least at that level where there's diversity, the challenge is that people sort of think 30% is a good target. And as soon as they start to inch towards 20-25%, they start to feel we've done well, right? So one is that you sort of say 30% women is good enough. But coming back to the point on the banking industry, I think, again, at senior levels, you see relatively fewer number of women. And that is a classic pyramid that we've seen a number of times in all the McKinsey reports that focus on women in the workplace, right? There's very, very few women at the top, and how those women either get lost from the workforce or they just don't make it to the top. And, when we're talking about the investing industry, I think we should also think about the investment banking industry.
Mm.
And iBanking is heavily, heavily male dominated.
And why is that?
I guess it's the same set of reasons, right? It continues to be heavily a boys' club. Deals are still closed over drinks. They are still closed. You still share cigars and smokes. You still sort of share some traditional jokes and not calling them sexist jokes. But beyond that, I think it is the same set of issues. These industries started off traditionally as male-dominated industries, and because there is when you're building your networks and when you're going about hiring people, this tendency of finding people who are similar to you. I think it is also called the likability bias or something like that. The tendency to seek out people who look close enough like you, who have gone to, say, similar schools, come from similar backgrounds, have similar, say, sports interests, or where you find some overlaps. All of that sort of I think starts to influence the composition of the workforce. But then, like you said, the stereotypes that it requires a lot of travel, it requires a lot of going out late in the night, late night working because there are very, very tight deal timelines, etc. And then, the stereotypes, and I've heard these stereotypes a number of times by people who don't even want to hire women candidates, and they don't want to interview women candidates, saying, no, but this job requires a lot of late hours and a lot of travel. I don't think a woman would be able to do it. And I have also seen on the other side where a woman is willing to do it and an organization is, keen to hire her. But sometimes the family doesn't step up and say, oh, but are you going to travel that much? And, maybe you should find sort of a more conservative job. So it does come together, I think, at the end of it, to that thing about the unconscious biases, which somehow have spread across, and they have roots in every process, in every interaction that we make. And I mean, ultimately, the workplace is comprised of people. And if people are working with unconscious biases, and, I should say this, I have been through an unconscious bias training, and I came out of that training saying, oh my God, I did not realize this, but I had unconscious biases myself. So it's not just men who are brought up with the biases, even men are brought up with the same, women are brought up with the same biases. So, it's a long process. But when we are thinking of change, I think trying to change how society works, how society brings up children, how society gender stereotypes boy and the girl child is a very long-term process. For us at WinPE, it is about saying within our ecosystem, within the firms that we are running, within the people that we are working with, how can we level the playing field? And how can we be more equal opportunity in everything we do, whether it is investing, whether it is hiring, whether it is giving follow-on funding, whether it is promoting, whatever it is. And I think that's why it's very exciting to work with people like Mukund, because it's all about saying, let's change what we can change and hope that that change in itself cascades and multiplies to bring about a larger and a broader transformation in the society.
So how are you changing this? It's interesting. This point came up with a hospital chain owner also. She said the same point, interestingly, and I'm just connecting this with your sector. She said that in the hospital, the male-female ratio, the female-to-male ratio is quite high because hospital does not ask for travel. And there is some unconscious bias. And in some cities or some countries, that bias may not be so unconscious also. It might be a reality that women may not be as safe. But she also brought in this point, and I think you also have, extending what you said, banking is a space which does not perhaps require as much travel as investment banking. Banking has already been permeated, and once unconscious biases against traveling will drop, perhaps investment banking also may be permeated more by women. Coming to what you have done. So what have you done? You are saying, माना कि अंधेरा है घना, किसने कहा दिया जलाना है मन? हम अपना दिया जलाएंगे, ठीक है? So how have you done this in your association, in the funds you sit on? I noticed that one of your board members is Anita George, who was on a similar session with us some time back. So how have you done this? One is you have a lot of top women on your board, right? What else have you done?
So yes, we've got 3 really fantastic women on the advisory board. You mentioned Anita George. The other 2 are Renuka Ramnath and Zia Modi. So, it is a cause that has strong support from the women, but more importantly, I think it is a cause that has a strong support from both women and men. So one of the most exciting things of what WinPE does is, these quarterly meetings that we have with our member firms. At least once a quarter, sometimes twice a quarter, we meet in a boardroom style format, closed door meetings, Chatham House rules. Nothing gets attributed, nothing gets carried outside unless it is in a knowledge sharing format. And this is where we have really those hard discussions. So I remember the first meeting, I did not have to say anything except we are running out of time, we need to close the meeting. Our members, focus on identifying challenges. And then there is a discussion on how to solve those challenges. And there are firms who will share experiences saying, this is a challenge I faced, or this is a change I made, which helped me solve my challenge. Sometimes we as WinPE, we suggest some solutions, but at the end of it, what we have had is a great format where we have priority areas for action. We have action items. For those action items, we have KPIs that all our member firms sign up to, and against every KPI is a timeline. And we at WinPE, we monitor delivery of those KPIs on the timelines. And then in these meetings, we bring forward all the progress that has been made, sort of talk about whether it's slow, whether it's fast, whatever. And I'll tell you small changes we made. The first thing everybody said was, we want to hire women, but we just can't seem to find them. We said, fine, let's think about how we are hiring. And in the meantime, this was on the day of WinPE's launch. So WinPE had no experience in itself. 6 months later, we went back to our member firms and said, you know what, we've got more than 1,000 women who've reached out to us. 85% of those women have sent us a message saying, I want to enter PEVC, but I don't know how. You have a demand, and I'm telling you, here is a supply. How do we plug the gap between the two? So a couple of things that our firms have done, our member firms. One is for mandates given to recruitment firms. There is now a commitment in place that no mandate will be given to a recruitment firm unless they bring in a certain percentage of women in the candidate pipeline.
That's a quota.
It's an input quota. It's not an output quota.
Okay.
There is a difference. So the candidate pipeline has to be diverse. Okay. So I'll tell you why I think this is important. When I was at IFC, I had a position which I had to keep vacant for a long time because I was supposed to hire a woman candidate. And I got really frustrated because I could not find a woman candidate in the top 5 or even in the top 10 that came to me. And I went back to the Excel sheet, which had all the candidates in it. And about 753 applicants, we had 7 women. Statistically speaking, the probability of making it to the top 10 is close to 0. So that is why this input quota is very important. The other thing our member firms have done is they have committed to blind screening processes. You mentioned this example about listening to the music from behind the curtain so that you don't know whether it's a man or a woman. Similar things, there are a number of blind screening tools. You could redact CVs, you could lead with case studies. And if you have interviews, you could have diverse interview panels. And you could have the same interview panels across so that you have consistency in the kind of feedback that you're receiving and consistency in the kind of matrices that are being measured. You could bring in more objective matrices for evaluating candidates than just having qualitative things saying, does this candidate meet our criteria? Do you think this candidate is a good fit? So number of these small changes, which are really at the foundation or at the heart of how employers work. So, our member firms have they have identified 8 matrices on gender diversity. They have started measuring those matrices and they have started sharing that data with WinPE. So in the last quarter, we collated all of that data and we benchmarked the member group's performance against market. She said, okay, this is what a Preqin report says the level of gender diversity is, and this is what we have within our group. So where are the areas we are doing very well? What are our learnings from there that we can share with everybody? Where are the areas where we still have gaps? And what is it that we can do to change that gap? So, the way I think about it, WinPE's work really begins where research and seminars and workshops end. Because we are saying, okay, we understand there is a challenge. We understand these are probably the factors that feed into the challenge. But how do we solve those challenges? That is what WinPE is focused on.
Path-breaking conviction. Great work done. Mukund, as a member of WinPE, Lighthouse, what has it done in this space, in the action space? Because I partially agree with what Karl Marx says. Karl Marx says, thinkers have interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. I feel thinking and interpreting is important because otherwise you'll take the change in the wrong direction. And also, as you said, knowing the source of thinking and interpreting is also important to rule out biases from there and then to change it. So what have you done to change it in Lighthouse? Are there any companies which are having a strong presence of women entrepreneurs which in your portfolio, or what have you done in this association?
Well, the short answer is we probably haven't done enough, right? And I think part of what Nupur has brought, and again, I think to give credit to Nupur, she's in a unique position because she essentially did what we did or worked with us in her role at IFC. And so it wasn't a stranger coming and saying, hey, let's do this together. It was someone who understood our business at a very intimate level and understood all of us and understood the senior levels in our industry. But we haven't done enough, right? So if you sort of go through and you sort of tick the box, as we've hired, we have gone to our, the search firms and stuff, hey, listen, we want a certain percentage of resumes, CVs to be women candidates. We've said the same thing to, when we talk to service providers saying, hey, we want women leadership in that. We have worked on things like policies within the firm, including maternity leave and support after maternity leave, that it's not just about getting more women opportunities to come into our industry, but how to support formally as they grow within the organization, right? But the reality is, I think the biggest thing that I think, again, I credit WinPE, but I think this is happening at all the member firms, is it starts a conversation. And let's be clear, not every single person within every single firm that is a WinPE member probably subscribes to everything that WinPE actually proposes, right? And that's okay, right? That's the natural diversity of thought, some good, some bad with that. But I think what this does is progresses that conversation in a way that otherwise would not be progressed. And then listen, we've had the fortune of backing some really terrific women entrepreneurs, right? One of our first investments in India, and we've been investing for about 15 years. One of our first investments in India was a diagnostics business out of Calcutta called Suraksha, which was co-founded by a woman named Ritu Mittal, and it was a highly successful business, and just run on very, very strong sort of operating principles. I mentioned earlier, I think we will one day will be recognized for Nika Falguni Nair, who, again, it's remarkable to me, what she has built, and I think what people don't realize is it's the Zavantas of the world, the Paytms, all of these things are going public, but what she has done is she has taken all of her sort of banking cred from her Kotak days and has built the most capital efficient technology business in the country, or maybe in the world. She's raised such little capital that the founder, she and her family, still own more than half of the business going into the IPO this week. Most other companies, founders own 7, 8, 10%. That's how good she is. Now, if that, again, I can't take credit for that, because if I hadn't put in capital, someone else would have, because she's just that good. But I think what we can celebrate is when you have success stories like that, and that can inspire the next generation, hopefully, of women entrepreneurs, hopefully they will come out of the woodwork, they will come to firms like ours, and we will then say, okay, let's help them succeed, right? And again, it's not going to happen overnight. The 10% of women entrepreneurs receiving capital, that's not going to go to 50% in a day or a week or a year. But can we see significant change by the end of this decade? Yes, right. And I think it's really it's creating momentum, right? And I think that's what we're trying to do, and that's what Nupur is really pushing us to do. And I think that's wonderful. And if that's our legacy as an industry and as leaders of the firm, probably the best thing we will have done.
That's such a candid and still such a humble way of sharing what you have done. And what you have done is actually making news. The only one example which you gave is currently the headlines. It's really, it was great to speak with both of you. We looked at the reality of the situation. We looked at the reasons, socioeconomic, financial, reasons why we are there, and we looked at some remedies, and we saw some strong action coming from both of you, which makes me feel that just as in 1920s, after John Stuart Mill and others got the woman the right to vote and contest in elections, today they say the only Ramraj in the world is in Scandinavia, where mostly women have ruled. So I hope the Naikas are who are the growing exception today, become the norm in times to come. And I hope similar is the situation in the PE and funding space. It was great to have both of you. Really, all the best. All the best. And I'll pass it on to Siddharth.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It was such an insightful and engaging conversation, and an absolute privilege to hear you all. And very well moderated, Mr. Choudary. Our guests and I, we've been hooked till the very end, and we've taken home a lot from today. And I really wish we had some more time. And thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining in and for staying till the end. And along with our weekly webinars and our publication, we're taking these discussions, conversations, and B2B opportunities exclusively on the community app, which is curated for leaders across 20 sector communities. So whether you would like to engage with us on the platform, leaders are invited to join us. So thank you very much, sirs and ma'am, once again. We look forward to having more such discussions in the future, and please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.